Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's 9 p.m. Eastern. It's Thursday night, November 5th, and we are here on Crawlspace's live gossip pod. What's going on? I'm Tim, here with Lance. What's up, Lance?
Wow, what an intro. I feel like I should run in and with the folding metal chair and smash somebody on the back.
You should.
I will. Don't give me a folding metal chair. It's so good to be here. Thursday night. The church bells have tolled 9 chimes. I feel like that's getting old. I feel like that shtick's getting old.
I think people love it. It's our calling card.
Okay.
And if you're watching this right now live on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube, why don't you click the little link and toggle your butt on over to Get Vocal, getvocal.com, and you can join a tremendous chat room full of people like you who love this show, who want to hear about the disappearance of Trenny Lynn Gibson and with our guest, our amazing guest, Laura Riste. Laura, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great. How are you?
Oh, we're doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. It's so good to see your ceiling today.
Just trying to get comfortable here in my staff accommodation room here.
Are you at work?
Yes.
I'm coming to you live from Sunshine Village in Banff, Alberta. So.
Oh wow! Up in the our neighbors to the north, the poutine maple syrup loving neighbors to the north. We love you up there, and we actually wish we were there right now.
Yes, absolutely love it up there north of the border. And Laura, your site is Canadian Girl 77, and that's girl with a U. And
Yes.
You have dedicated a website all completely to the disappearance of Trenny Lynn Gibson. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it all started in June of 2003 when I found Trenny's story, or maybe she found me. I'm not sure which, but anyway, we found each other. And I was really fascinated by her case and the fact that it had never been solved. She had never been found. So I started researching. The research part mainly started in around 2005. I went back through old newspaper articles, read about the search. In those days, there wasn't much about Trenny on the internet. One of my major sources of information was a book that had been written called Unsolved Disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains by Juanita Baldwin and Esther Grubb. Then as time went on, I eventually connected with her sister and her mother. I eventually connected with some of her classmates. I had a person find me that went to college in Tennessee with some of Trenny's classmates. And I had amassed a large amount of information, several bankers' boxes worth, and I needed to take it somewhere. I needed to do something with it. So I came to the conclusion that the best thing to do would be to start a site for Trenny based on her story. So that's what I decided to do.
You really have this amazing moment that happened that Tim and I really and we love it much better when you tell the story. But when you had that sort of I guess that I don't want to say paranormal moment, but you had sort of a sixth sense was happening when you said that you heard Trenny talk to you, but it was like a metaphorical talk to, right?
Well, I think Trenny definitely spoke to Laura. I'm not sure how literal or figurative this was, but yeah, I think it was a profound moment that Laura had that really got her started in this blog, in this website.
I think we might have lost her.
I think she's having some connection problems. Yeah.
I thought she was offended by my comment, my question.
She was. She definitely was. She actually texted me and said,
She's
I
out.
can't believe Lance just asked that. Just tell him I had a connection problem because I don't want to be rude. But I really don't want to talk to him anymore tonight.
So she's actually faking the frozen screen.
Yeah. She screenshotted it real quick and then uploaded it. Yeah. Well, how's it going, chat room? Let's turn it to you. We'll get, I'm sure we will reconnect with Laura momentarily, but if anyone wants to hang out, we are a little bit fiery tonight already, as Jason is noticing. How's it going, chat room?
Oh, what's going on, man? I should check the numbers because I haven't checked the numbers for Georgia in about 7 minutes.
Well, if anyone wants to hop on, I mean, we are going to talk about Trenny Lynn Gibson tonight. It is a really mysterious disappearance. We've had Laura on, Missing Maura Murray. She was on, I think, 3 episodes. I think we might have done 4 on Trenny Lynn Gibson. Hey,
5.
Laura, how are you?
Good. 5 episodes.
5. Okay,
Yes.
We did 5. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I am curious about that moment. So you had this moment where you made the decision that this was going to be what you were going to do for, a good portion of your life is to figure out what happened to Trenny. And you had this sort of metaphorical moment, right? Where Trenny kind of spoke to you.
Have you ever had a moment in your life where all of a sudden anything that you've ever questioned, everything all of a sudden makes sense? If you've ever had a moment like that, then that's about what happened to me. Where if I didn't understand something or I had questions about my life or where I was going and what I was doing, that Sunday morning in 2003, suddenly I knew what it was that I was supposed to do. So if you've ever had a moment like that in your life, then it would probably make sense to you because that's what happened to me.
Can't say that I've had a moment other than
I mean, that's really profound. I mean, we could spend an entire show on that moment, I think. But we won't. But yeah, no, that is profound. Have you had other moments like that in your life?
No, that's about the strangest thing and most profound thing that's ever happened to me. I don't know if you've read my article that I wrote on private investigations for the missing about coming to discover Trenny. But if you read it and you think about it, there's a couple references in there to a Bob Dylan song. And the song is Shelter from the Storm. The day that I discovered Trenny's case, I was home by myself. And oftentimes when I was home alone, I'd have the TV on or I'd be playing music in the background. One of the oldies channels usually on TV that would play music, hits of the 60s, 70s, something like that. And when I found Trenny's case and I had that moment where I felt like I couldn't breathe, there was that old Bob Dylan song, Shelter from the Storm, playing in the background. So that's almost like my Trenny theme song. So if you read the article and you see the couple references in there to that song, that's why. If I could only turn the clock back to when God and her were born is one of them.
And you physically had to pick yourself up, right? When this moment happened, did you couldn't, I don't want to tell the story for you, but it's like your legs kind of gave out.
Well, I was sitting at my computer desk and I was scrolling through the Doe Network and I was ready to call it a day. I'd looked through probably about 13 pages of cases. And if you're familiar with the Doe Network, there's several like the photos of missing cases will load, and there's probably about 15 per page. And in those days, I was on dial-up internet, so it would take quite a while for the page to load. So I'd do a little housework or something, and then I'd sit down and I'd scroll through the cases. And I was familiar with some of them. Some of them were new to me. And I ran across a small photo on the Doe Network of Trenny. And I thought, well, who's this girl? I've never heard of her. And it's kind of a different name. I've never heard of the name Trenny before. I've heard of Penny, but never Trenny. So I clicked on it. And then, of course, like the photo will enlarge, and then there'll be a synopsis of her disappearance. And when I saw the small photo before I clicked on it, I was more intrigued. I wondered, oh, it's kind of a pretty girl, long hair, which was popular at the time. And I wonder what happened to her. And then when the photo enlarged, it was like something hit me with a ton of bricks. I felt pressure in my chest and I couldn't breathe. And I looked at Trenny's photo on the computer screen, and she was just looking at me and saying, help me, you have to help me. You have to help me. Somebody needs to help me. And then that's kind of when I slid out of the computer chair and slid to the floor. And I just kind of laid on the floor for a moment or two, and this Bob Dylan song was playing in the background. And, the verses over and over and on it went, and whatever. And it took probably 2 or 3 minutes for me to feel like I was probably going to be okay. And I shouldn't maybe try to crawl to the phone and dial 911. But when I finally started, the pressure eased in my chest and I got back up in my chair and took a few deep breaths. Then that's when I started to read her case synopsis. And inside my brain, it just kept screaming, she knew them. She knew who did this to her. This wasn't some random thing. She knew the person. And that's just kind of what was playing over and over in my head. And I'll tell you, I stayed away from the computer for a couple days after that episode, because I wasn't sure if I was going to find somebody else or what was going to happen. But when I started to calm down a little bit, it was all of a sudden like everything just was falling into place. And now I seem to know what it was exactly I was supposed to do. And what I was supposed to do was I was supposed to try to find out what happened to this poor girl on October 8th, 1976. And that's kind of the journey I've been on ever since.
I'm curious about the voice that you were hearing say, help me, and then any other time you had a voice in your head in reference to this moment. Was it your voice, or were you hearing like another?
No,
voice?
it's a girl's voice. I believe it's Trenny's voice. Of course, I've never heard Trenny speak, but it's a girl's voice, and I believe it's hers.
That is remarkable. That's an incredible story.
It really is. What photo of Trenny was this that you looked at?
It would have been her photo in her junior year. And actually, the picture was taken the day before she disappeared. That was the photo that was on the Doe site.
Wow.
And she was 16 years old, went missing on October 8th. Like you said, that was also Brianna Maitland's birthday. So we gave Trenny a shout out when we had Brianna's episode last month. And she was born August 17th, 1960. So she was 16 years old. 16 years old. And it is, I remember the first time you were telling us about this, it is, I was getting creeped out because it's a really eerie circumstance.
It is. And it's, and I feel the same way. And it's just something I've kind of learned, to accept and live with, but it still creeps me out to this day. She was there 1 minute and she was gone the next.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the circumstances surrounding her actual disappearance?
Well, Trenny was going on a field trip. She was part of it was called ornamental horticulture. And it was a new class that was being offered at Bearden that year. They built a wing onto the school, and they had ornamental horticulture. They had a child care department. They had an electronics department. And a fellow named Wayne Dunlap was the instructor for ornamental horticulture. And Trenny was always interested in plants and growing things and whatever. And this course was like an elective. So we'd call it here, we'd call it an extra or something like that. Like it wasn't a mandatory class that you'd have to take. My understanding is the class was 3 hours long. They had a greenhouse that was outside the school where they tended the plants and so on and so forth. And by all accounts, from anyone I've talked to that attended Bearden and was a part of the class, Mr. Dunlap was a popular teacher with the students. He was young. He was about probably 28, 29 when Trenny went missing. So the students knew that they would be going on a field trip, and they knew that it was going to be an all-day affair, and they knew that they had to bring a bag lunch with them. It's kind of a toss-up when I talk to the students. Some of them claim that they knew they were going to the Smokies, but most of them claim they didn't know where they were going until they got on the bus. The teacher got on and then talked to them, and then he's the one that announced that the destination was the Great Smoky Mountains. So that happened on October 8th, 1976. Trenny had a little bit of apprehension about going on the field trip, and it's been kind of difficult to figure out exactly why. From what I can attest, she hadn't really been anywhere or been away from home for the entire day before. So her brother, who was in the Navy but was home on leave, he had gotten a friend of his named Robert Simpson to kind of keep an eye on Trenny for the day if she needed anything or so on and so forth, to hopefully make her feel a little more comfortable about going and being away for the day. And Trenny actually thought that the morning of the trip would be canceled because the weather forecast was for inclement weather, colder temperatures, fog, rain, all that fun stuff. But when her mother drove her to school that morning, she asked a fellow student that was out on the sidewalk about the trip, and she was assured that it was a go. So she left her purse in her mother's car and her books, and she just took her bag lunch, and she kissed her mother goodbye and said, I'll see you later. And that was it. So Trenny had nothing with her but her bag lunch that day. So the students boarded the bus. They were told then by Mr. Dunlap that they were headed to the Smoky Mountains. And all the students were clapping and whistling and cheering and, happy to be out of school for the day. And it was a Friday, so that would make it a long weekend, right? So as far as I can tell, the bus trip to the Smokies was uneventful. Nothing untoward happened. There were rumors that the bus might have been followed, but I haven't been able to substantiate that. It's a possibility they could have been, unless somebody was going to face the rear of the bus for the trip and check for, traffic following behind them. It's, it's kind of hard to say. So anyway, they got to the parking lot, the one that's close to Klingman's Dome. And Mr. Dunlap instructed the busload of students that their assignment was to hike to Andrews Bald and back down to the bus. They were to stay on the main trail. They weren't to take any side trails or deviate from the route. They could look at plants and flowers and trees along the way, but they weren't to pick or gather anything. And he asked them if their assignment was clear, and the students agreed, and there was a show of hands showing that they agreed to this. And then they were let to go off on their merry way. Mr. Dunlap was the only chaperone on the trip. The school bus driver, he stayed with the bus. There were no other adults on the trip. But Mr. Dunlap did have some of the older students in kind of a trust position to make sure that the group, for the most part, relatively stayed together and so on. And the students took off and were just hiking according to their own pace, fast, slow, middle of the road, whatever. And Trenny was hiking with Robert Simpson, and they hiked to the Bald, and they stopped and ate their lunch. And then things started to get a little gray, cloudy, I should say, as to what happened when they left the Bald that day.
Okay.
So I'll pause.
Yeah. This is where it starts getting a little bit creepy, but I want to talk about the relationship that Robert had with Trenny's brother, because he sort of entrusted Trenny with Robert, correct?
Yes.
And Robert probably had a crush on Trenny, or maybe made a couple of advances.
I don't know that he ever made advances. I've heard from several students that he did have a crush on her. He did like her. And Robert Simpson really wasn't what you'd call dating material back then. He was a pleasant enough kid, but he was overweight. He didn't take time and care with his appearance, scraggly hair, sometimes dirty. And he was overweight, and he tended to wear overalls. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with wearing overalls, but of course, that's a little bit different from what the other students wore to school in those days. He had a car, and he was always willing, like, to drive students places. Trenny rode with him a time or two in his car, but he was mainly Trenny's brother's friend, and he was a year older than Trenny was. So he was more her brother's age and more her brother's friend. But when Robert Gibson Jr. entrusted Robert Simpson with the task of looking after Trenny, he seemed to be fine with it and think that he was capable of the job, and everything was good. So
did he have a history of being violent or getting in trouble a lot? Was he sort of a delinquent?
No, not that I can ever tell. I couldn't find anything where he'd ever really been in any major trouble. Things like, he smoked a little pot, smoked cigarettes. That was par for the course in the 70s. Nothing that he was ever into any kind of trouble or juvenile delinquency or anything like that. He did like hiking. He did know the Smokies quite well. But his area was more the Tellico area, not the area where they were that day. But he did know the Smokies well. He did like hiking and hunting and that sort of thing.
I think you've caused quite a stir in the chat section with the overall comment. I think a lot of people were actually wearing overalls tonight, and they're a little upset with...
Oh, I have overalls. There's nothing wrong with wearing overalls. It's just... In the 70s, when everyone was wearing jeans or cords, and here's somebody in overalls, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just a little different. That's
actually
all.
we're getting comments saying there is something wrong with overalls. So maybe I misread the room.
Well, a person too that's overweight in those days, they probably didn't have a lot of choices for clothing, that would fit properly.
That's a good point. And so I saw you mentioned Mr. Dunlap, and I saw Tim get all fired up again. Tim really doesn't like us.
No, I feel bad about that.
I mean, overweight ladies in the 70s. Well, they had moo-moos, but what the fuck did men have, really? Like, I guess they wore overalls.
And cigarettes. Everyone smoked cigarettes back then too. They were probably all smoking on the bus.
Oh yeah. So, but no evidence of juvenile delinquency, anything like that. And moving on to Mr. Dunlap, I know you don't really like Mr. Dunlap.
Oh, I actually feel bad about that now. I mean, I do think Lance is excited to have gotten this started. I think he really made some poor decisions that day, and I'm sure that if he's not responsible in some way for Trenny's Gibson's disappearance, which it doesn't seem like he is, then he is like, thinking about it every day, and and really regrets some of his actions, I'm sure.
A part of me feels bad for Mr. Dunlap, but there's part of me that, like I've said before, like I've told you to before, I suspect everyone, unless there's some reason that I can positively rule them out. I suspect everybody. If my 99-year-old grandma had been in the Smokies in 1976, I'd probably suspect her too. But that's just the way I have to look at this. But Mr. Dunlap, he was a veteran. He was in the Vietnam War. He was a quartermaster. And I've reached out to him several times very gently and told him, I'd really like to talk to you about this. I understand it's hard for you. And I said, would it make it easier for you if we took a less direct approach, and maybe I just emailed you a list of questions and you could answer them in point form and email it back to me, if that would be a little bit easier for you? Because I understand that it had a profound effect on his life and it vastly affected his mental health. So I was just trying to make it as easy as I could for him. And he doesn't even respond and say, I don't want to talk about this. I can't do this right now, or it's in the past. I just don't hear from him. He stays silent, and his silence bothers me, because he could tell me to get lost and I could deal with that. But when you're silent, that really bothers me.
It does speak volumes when you're not saying anything. It makes you think that someone instructed him to not comment on it just to be safe, just because you don't want to say something wrong. I'm not trying to implicate him, but it does have the sound of like, listen, even if he didn't do anything, someone might have said to him, just don't say anything, because words can be used against you in any way.
That's right.
But that being said, where was your grandmother on October 8th, 1976?
Brooks, Alberta, married to my
Okay.
Okay, just check.
We cover all bases here.
She was nowhere near the Smokies. I'm sorry, bad example, but she was nowhere near the Smokies. But I was just trying to show you that I suspect everybody that could have been in the area, unless there's some way that I could positively rule them out.
Well, there is sort of an odd sequence of events that took place in order for Trenny to disappear. This field trip ended up being spontaneous for the most part, so that's kind of a clue. And I say for the most part because I believe no one else knew until that morning where they were going, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Some of the students seem to remember that they knew ahead of time. And I think it's possible that they could have. If they had a parent or a relative that worked at the school that knew about the trip. The other issue was not an issue, but Mr. Dunlap tended to hang out with some of his students after school and on weekend. They went fishing, things like that. He had students that would come in and tend the plants that were in the greenhouse. Perhaps he let it slip somehow that, they were going to go to the Smokies. I don't know. But I could say it would be possible that they could find out if they wanted to.
I really don't like that about Dunlap. I almost can give him a pass, because I think there are a couple more suspicious people involved or were there, I should say, that day. But hanging out with the students, going fishing, like, that's just kind of weird. And I know it's a different time, it's a different area, but
it is. Yeah, it is a little different. That was a slight cause for concern with me as well. And it could have been completely benign and has nothing to do with this story. But from what I'm told, he did have a tendency to kind of hang out with some of his students. So he may have let it slip where they were going. That could be how they found out. I don't know. There was also an outdoor club at Bearden. Now, Mr. Dunlap, he didn't have anything necessarily to do with starting that group. It was actually the biology teacher that was in charge of it, Mr. Ensley. But Robert Simpson was a member of the outdoor club, and so were several other of the Bearden alumni.
So what is the red flag about him hanging out with his students? Is it just, yeah, I mean, just does it instantly just reek of something inappropriate?
No, I don't even know about inappropriate. Just
No, not necessarily, but when you sit down and look at it the way I've looked at this case, if you start connecting things together, there's a possibility that there could have been an issue or a problem, or it could have led to other things. It's just another link in the chain.
yeah, it kind of so he was late 20s, right?
About 28. He was born in 1948, so the same year as my mother, actually. So when Trenny disappeared, he would have been around that 28 year mark.
He looks like he's 38 in his pictures. It's that thing with people back then. Like, I'm looking at his picture, and you could have told me he was 18, and I'd be like, okay, he looks like he's 38.
Well, that's even worse then, because he was hanging out with these 16-year-old kids, fishing with them. Hey, come with me. I'll show you how to fish. Like, what was he telling them? Like, what was he getting from that? You know what I mean?
I don't know. The guy won't talk to me, so I can't.
Sorry, I get a little worked up at some of these things. I mean, did he have friends his age? Because what is he hanging out with 16-year-old kids for?
Really, I don't know. I don't know if he had friends his own age. I talked to his ex-wife. She was very good. She remembers the time when Trenny went missing. She and Wayne Dunlap were married at the time. She remembers when Trenny disappeared, and she and Wayne are still friends. He's remarried. She and him did remain friends. I talked to her, and she actually reached out to Wayne on my behalf and said, look, will you please talk to this person? She's not the law. She doesn't mean any harm or anything, but she'd really like to talk to you about Trenny. She's researching the case. And the response she said that she got was he didn't think he could deal with it. He didn't think he could handle it. And she said, well, no, I think it would do you some good to talk about it. And I've never heard from him. He's never reached out to me. She said that she gave him all my contact information, but I've heard nothing since. And I've written him letters. I've had another person that's involved in the case hand deliver a letter because they live not too terribly far from Johnson City, where Mr. Dunlap lives now. They've hand delivered a letter, like they put it in his mailbox, and it's the same thing. He just will not talk to me. He will not come forward. And that scares me a little bit. Even if he emailed me and said, I can't deal with this, I wish you'd just leave me alone, I could probably handle that. But his silence bothers me.
Why? What is it about his silence?
Because most of the people that I've talked to, classmates, searchers, teachers, family, they'll either talk to me or they'll tell me, I don't really have anything to add, Laura. I didn't know Trenny very well, or, that's in the past and I just can't talk about it or whatever. I just can't do it. I can handle that. At least I get some kind of response, but the silence that irritates me. It's like, why don't you want to talk? What is exactly the problem here? I'm not the law. I just want to ask you about a student that went missing on October 8th, 1976. And if there was nothing, you had nothing to do with her disappearance, great. What are you hiding if you talk to me? Are you afraid I'm going to trip you up and you're going to say the wrong thing? Or what? Like what's the big secret? But there are a lot of secrets involved in this case. This is only the tip.
Oh, for sure. You had alluded to this car that may have been following the bus, so that's a whole nother avenue to go down. But take us back to when she was having lunch with Robert. The weather started to turn a little bit, and she leaves lunch with Robert, by all accounts, alone, right? Like they had split up at that point.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So at some after lunch, sorry to interrupt, after they had eaten lunch, Robert had commented later in his report that he gave the police that Trenny had given him half her sandwich, so he didn't think she was planning on taking off or going anywhere. They sat and had lunch. Robert ate part of Trenny's sandwich, and then he said they got under a tree, went and sat under a big tree because it had started raining. And then Robert said that he kind of wanted to hang out a little more on the Bald, but Trenny wanted to go back. So basically, it was he hung out at the Bald, and Trenny turned around and left his company to head back to the bus, even though he was tasked with looking after her. And when he was asked later about where he was or what he was doing when Trenny disappeared, he said that he'd gone off tracking a bear. So Trenny left Robert, and she was hiking back to the bus. Now, mind you, the weather isn't good. It's overcast and foggy and raining. Some of the students remarked Trenny was walking quickly, like she'd catch up to one group of students, fall into step with them, and then pick up the pace and walk ahead, catch up to the next group, and so on. And some of the students remarked, well, she's kind of seemed like she was in a hurry, but it was wet, it was cold. She might have had enough and just wanted to get back to the bus. But anyone that talked to her said she seemed in good spirits. She didn't seem like she was upset about anything or anything like that. And then the last group that she walked with, they sat down to rest because there was a boy in the group and he was asthmatic. And he was starting to wheeze a little bit, high altitude and the hike. So he and a friend of his, they sat down to rest, and they said to Trenny, well, sit with us. And she said, no, she wanted to keep going. And they didn't really think anything of it because, like I said, it's wet and cold and kind of miserable outside. So she walked off, and these two students, they sat there and they watched Trenny go off. And they said they'll never forget that. They were just kind of watching the back of her walk down the trail. And then the students, it was a girl and a boy. The girls said that it looked like Trenny sort of stopped and crouched down like she was looking at something that was off the trail on the right. And then it looked like she stepped off the trail. So this girl thought that was a little odd. So when she and the young gentleman got back up to continue hiking back down to the bus, when they walked past the area where they thought where Trenny had gone off, the girl stepped off and just had a quick look around, and she said it made no sense that anyone would get off trail there. It was there was a lot of brush. There was a rock that had a spring in it. So there was literally like water coming out of this rock. And it was overgrown. And she just thought it was odd. Like, why would anybody get off there? She said that she called Trenny's name a couple times, but got no answer. So she and this other student, they just carried on back down the trail, and they figured that they would see Trenny when they got to the bus. But of course, that wasn't the case.
Well, that is very interesting. What would it be in your head? Would this be somebody like luring her into the woods, or would it be her trying to get away from somebody? Maybe she saw somebody coming in the opposite direction. What are the conclusions that you've put together?
My thoughts are somebody must have lured her off. Trenny wouldn't have left the trail unless she thought like she was in danger, like you said, or if she saw a friendly face. The teacher said to stay on the main trail. Trenny was obedient as far as I can tell with anyone that I've spoken with. I think somebody got her attention, whether they waved at her or threw a pebble or something when she was walking by herself, and then she got off trail to see them. The other thought about it is, and that's a little more complicated, is it's a possibility that she was set up. Somebody said to her, oh, hey, Trenny, you know that boy you like, so-and-so? Well, he kind of wants to talk to you or whatever. And if you just go walking down this way by yourself, he's going to whistle or wave or throw a pebble, and then you can step off trail and see them, kind of thing. Something like that. She might have done that for a boy she liked, or someone, or somebody that she knew well. It's a possibility. The other thought is they may have used Bob, her brother. Trenny was crazy about Bob. They were very close. Bob was on leave from the Navy. He'd come home Wednesday, and this is always a point that never sat well with me. Bob Gibson came home from the Navy on leave on Wednesday, and Trenny disappeared on Friday. She was so excited that Bob was coming home because she hadn't seen him since July, when he'd signed up for the Navy and gone for his basic training and so on and so forth. If someone wanted to set her up and said, hey, Trenny, Bob followed us up here and he wanted to surprise you, and he's just waiting off trail for you. He's going to throw a pebble or something. He didn't want to hang out with the rest of the group or whatever. Bob was older, and then you can go off trail or whatever and see Bob. And then Robert Simpson, being a good friend of theirs, said, hey, I'll catch up with you guys later, and then we'll just go back to Knoxville with Bob, and we'll hang out and so on and so forth. Like I said, Trenny would have gotten off the trail if she thought Bob was there. She also might have gotten off if she thought a good friend of hers from school was there, or a boy she liked. There was some kind of lure.
And there was never any sighting or any account of somebody students didn't know, maybe on the trail, hiking too close to them or anything like that?
By asking some of the students, the only thing that I get is, well, there was a couple strange men, and I said, okay, well, where were these men? Oh, well, they weren't on the trail with us. We just saw them in the trees here and there. And I mentioned, well, did you report this? That this, there were odd people in the off trail in the woods, kind of thing. Trenny wouldn't have gotten off trail for just anybody. If she knew the person, yes. If she didn't know the person, I can't see it happening. They would have had to physically remove her from the trail. And one of the questions that I run into a lot on my forum or private message, well, why didn't she scream? And I believe the reason that Trenny didn't scream was because she knew her attacker. She didn't know they were her attacker. They didn't attack her to start with. She was lured off, and then when she was far enough away, then that's kind of when things got a little
Man, see, this is what is the really eerie part for me, and I think some other people, is that she could be no more than maybe 20 or 30 feet off trail before she meets up with the person who ultimately, leads to her demise. And then there's nothing left. Like there's no account of that after. It's still unsolved.
Right. And she's like, and she could be like 50 feet from classmates at that point or something like that. It's bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a strange situation all the way around. And I could believe if she was abducted by a stranger, if her belongings didn't surface after. It's the fact that her belongings started turning up that struck a chord with me. No, she knew who did this to her. I don't know why exactly this happened to her, but it's somebody had to have known, like she had to have known her attacker, because her belongings start showing up. Well, if Trenny's missing, why are her belongings turning up? And it was always blamed on the fact, oh, well, Trenny gave me this before she ran away or whatever. But Trenny's ring was valuable. If Trenny was going to run away, she'd want to keep that in order to pawn it or whatever. And she was smart enough to prepare if she wanted to run away. She would have taken belongings with her, at least her money and her identification. She had over $1,000 in her bank account that was untouched, and she had $200 in her desk drawer.
So kind of unreasonable to think she just would have left for her own reasons without that kind of money.
And one point I've always hammered home too is, why the hell does everybody think she had to go to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to run away? The kid lived in Knoxville. There's planes, trains, buses. all kinds of traffic. There's 101 ways to run
By all
away if
accounts, she
you
wasn't
wanted
even
to.
very prepared to go on the field trip.
No, that's another point that I've often brought up is how did the students know where they were going? Did they know they were going to be going outside hiking? How did the girls know to wear sneakers or boots? They didn't know. Maybe they were going to a museum or a greenhouse or something indoors. Trenny had borrowed a jacket. Robert Simpson had lent her his brown and orange plaid jacket because she didn't have a coat. She had a sweater on with a blouse on underneath and jeans and running shoes, but she didn't have a heavy coat.
It's really perplexing why that even took place in the first place. I see maybe the administration wanting to surprise the kids if it was like a museum, but you're going out into the woods and you're going hiking and the weather's not good. Like,
Right.
tell the kids, you know, even if you want to surprise them with the location, just say, hey, dress appropriately, maybe wear hiking boots, maybe wear a bigger jacket. The fact that they didn't tell anybody anything and just left it to the elements is really crazy to me. Now I'm on Tim's side. I'm not a big
Well,
Dunlap fan.
one thing that always came up with me, and I'm sorry if this sounds as harsh as it does, but the teacher, Mr. Dunlap, he was a quartermaster in the Army. So he's got to keep track of supplies, ammunition, weapons, and then he loses a fucking kid on a field trip. It just boggles my mind. And Trenny's poor mother, she was so upset, and it still bothers her to this day, and it would me too if I were in her shoes. Trenny had wanted her mother to come along as a chaperone on the field trip, even though she wasn't 100% sure where exactly they were going to go. And her mother, Hope, did really want to go and do this and go with Trenny on this trip. But when she found out it was an all-day affair, she hit a snag because she didn't have a babysitter for Trenny's youngest brother, Miracle, who was only 5 or 6 at the time. So she ended up having to back out and stay home in order to provide childcare for her youngest son. And she said the guilt just gnaws at her. You know, if only she had gone, if only she'd found somebody to look after her son, she could have gone, and then maybe Trenny would still be here today, and none of us would be sitting here talking like this.
Can't imagine that. That sounds like a torment that you have to live with every single hour of every day. That's just
Yeah.
How long after Trenny's disappearance did her belongings start to show up?
It wasn't long after. The first thing that showed up was the comb, and it was Trenny's brother. There's a lot of Roberts in this story, so it was her brother Bob that found the comb, and it was sitting in plain sight on the dashboard of Simpson's car. And Bob said to Simpson, hey, you know, that's Trenny's comb. And Simpson just kind of made an offhand remark. He says, yeah, I know. Trenny gave it to me to hold for her. And Bob was perplexed. Why in the world would Simpson have Trenny's comb and not say anything? But he did have it on the dash of his car. He wasn't hiding it or anything, but he didn't make mention of it to the family. He didn't say, oh, you know, by the way, Trenny had given me this comb. Trenny treasured that comb. I know that sounds silly, you know, just with a plastic comb. But it wasn't just any plastic comb. It was one of those heavy Stanley ones. And her mother had bought one for her and one for her sister Tina. And in those days, those combs were about $4. So they were quite expensive. And Trenny treasured this thing, and she always had it in her hip pocket of her jeans, and then she'd pull it out and run it through her hair. She had really long hair. And she was never without the comb, you know. She was fastidious about her belongings, and it was always in her pocket. And it would just seem odd that she'd just flippantly give it to somebody. Oh, you know, hold this for me or whatever. And Bob Gibson said that Simpson had been using it to comb his own hair, and it was all wadded. This comb was with his own hair, and he said that Trenny would have been horrified to see it look like that and whatever. He said it just made no sense. And then her ring showed up. One of the girls in the sophomore class had Trenny's ring. And this leaked out to the public, and one of the families that went to church with the Gibsons got wind of this. And the girl that had the ring went to church both with this family as well as the Gibson family. So this lady, I'll call her Sue, her mother was very upset when she heard that this girl had this ring of Trenny's. So she thought that her daughter, Sue, in this story, ought to phone this girl and try and find out how she got this and to talk her into returning it to the family, because that was the right thing to do. So Sue, it took some convincing, but Sue phoned this girl up, and she knew her, and she told her, you know, you've got to give this ring back. It doesn't belong to you. She asked the girl where she got it, how she got it. The girl would not tell her anything, but after a lot of coaxing and pleading, she finally agreed that it probably was right if she returned it to the Gibsons. And
okay, we got some great questions coming in from the chat room. And was Simpson, was he in the Army or the Navy? Or I'm sorry, Dunlap. Okay.
No. What branch was her brother in? I think Braun's question was about the brother.
Okay. Sorry.
Trenny's brother Bob was
Cool.
in the Navy. He served aboard the USS Ramsey.
And did Robert have, and that's Simpson, did he have his jacket after Trenny disappeared?
Yeah. Not that we know of, not that we can verify. The jacket, it's believed, disappeared with Trenny. Although I will interject, you've heard me talk about my friend Jim that lives in Kingsport, Tennessee. And when he went to college, he went to East Tennessee State University. He met a group of girls that had graduated from Bearden. They'd be a couple years younger than Trenny. And they were among the group that told him that Robert Simpson got his jacket back. But I've never been able to verify that he did. As far as I know.
And speaking of Jim, Jim's got a crazy story, right? About told him they'll never figure out what happened to Trenny. Can you tell that story?
Well, Jim has two stories, actually. Jim he grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, and he actually still lives there. That's why I don't use his real name. His family was from the area. His dad worked at Eastman. So if you're from the area, you know what Eastman is. But anyway, when Trenny disappeared, Jim was a couple years younger than her. So he would have been about 14. And they were kind of under an almost blackout in Kingsport. There was a little bit about Trenny's disappearance on television, and there was a few articles in the newspaper. And he said that he always remembered his parents, talking about that poor girl that's missing. And Jim was an outdoorsy type of kid. So was his father, fishing, hunting, hiking, that sort of thing. So they were talking about, I wonder what could have happened to her, and so on and so forth. And the search was still going on for her and that kind of thing. And probably about a month after Trenny vanished, so I want to say November of 76, Jim was at a basketball game at Bearden. The school that he went to was called Dobbins Bennett, and they were rivals of Bearden's. So while attending this basketball game, Jim met this girl. She was standing kind of by herself, and he went over and started talking to her and whatnot. And he said they were having a fairly good conversation and getting on well. And he said, by the way, he said, did they ever find out what happened to that girl? I think her name was Trenny. And he said this girl that he was talking to just gave him the strangest look. And he said it just gave him shivers. And she said to him, she was dead half an hour after she disappeared. And then she gave him this little smile and she walked away from him. And I mean, in those days, there wasn't a whole lot you could do. When Jim got home, he told his parents what this girl had said. And I believe they had gone down and given the police a statement or something like that. I don't think it really went anywhere. And that was sort of the end of it. In those days, there was no internet. You had to rely on the newspaper and word of mouth. So Trenny's case sort of stayed in the back of Jim's memory until he attended East Tennessee State University in the early 1980s. So when Jim was at ETSU, he met these three girls, and they had graduated from Bearden, and they got to talking a little bit, and he asked them, did anything ever come of Trenny's case? Did they ever find her, find out what happened, that kind of thing? And the girls didn't say too much, but as they hung out with Jim a little more, I guess they decided he was trustworthy. So then they started telling him things. One of the girls said that Robert Simpson got his jacket back. They claimed that Trenny knew who did this to her, that she was murdered, and she knew her attackers. They claimed that it had to do with drugs. One of the girls was quiet, and she was quieter than the others. And once she decided that Jim was trustworthy, she mentioned that she was told that Trenny is on Mellinger Death Ridge, that's where they left her body. And she told Jim that she had to have his absolute word that he wouldn't say anything to anyone about this. She was afraid. She was afraid that if the right people heard and found out that she told him, that it was going to make trouble for her, and the same thing that happened to her might happen to Trenny and all this. And Jim kept asking her, well, who is this? Who is this person that's going to harm you if you say anything? And she didn't want to talk about it. It was too scary. She just had to make sure that Jim wasn't going to tell anyone. She needed his secrecy.
Jeez, what a ridiculous thing to put on a poor person. That's where the story ended?
Yeah, so she never found out, or he never found out.
Well, Jim, he knows who these girls are. He knows who they are. I have their names. I've reached out to them to ask them, can we talk to you? Are you willing to come forward? So on. I haven't gotten a reply from any of them yet, but I've been telling them, if you've got information, if you could please contact me or contact the authorities. I said, contact Jim if you don't feel comfortable talking to me. But it always had an effect on him. When Jim's wife, she knows of the case too. She's also from the area. She remembers hearing about it. She was a few years younger than Trenny. I think about 4 or 5 years younger than Trenny was. She remembers hearing about it too. So when I started getting more vocal with Trenny's case, it was actually Jim who reached out to me. And once we started talking and we got comfortable with each other, then that's when he dropped this, that he had gone to school with these girls and this is what they had to say. And he said he's never ever forgotten that, and it's had quite a profound impact on his life too.
End up going to the authorities to tell them anything about this?
He did. He spoke to his parents about it, and they went down and filed a report. And the report is probably buried, on somebody's desk somewhere, or who knows, in a file box in a room someplace. But as far as he knew, it was never followed up on. The girls that he went to university with never mentioned that the authorities contacted them to come and talk.
Well, geez. And where did they say that the body was again? And how far away is that from where they were searching, previously in 76?
Well, Mellinger Death Ridge, I've mentioned that before. It's out of the search area, and it's a real rough, rocky area a lot of snakes there. There is a cemetery up in that area. It's named after a settler. I believe his name was Jasper Mellinger, Jasper or Jacob Mellinger. And he met an untimely death. He actually got tangled in a bear trap and died. So they named that ridge after him. They called it Mellinger Death Ridge. But it would be a terrible place to try and search. Like I said, it'd be a great place to snap an ankle or break a hip, because it's rocks, snakes. It's terrible terrain up in that area. But this girl, this classmate, she didn't allude to exactly how she knew that Trenny was there. She just said that somebody had told her that that's where.
How would they have gotten up there? I wonder, though.
It's possible by Jeep, four-wheel drive vehicle. There were a lot of Jeep trails in the area. Like, some of them just grew over with time. Jim and I got maps like of the park from the early 70s, and I think we've got up to 1978. And we've been looking at the Jeep trails. He's more of a map reader than I am, but we've been looking at the Jeep trails and trying to figure out a possible way that they could have, where they could have gone, and so on and so forth.
Well, it sounds like they did something to, if this is actually the case, then something was done to her at the site of the hike, and then maybe they came back and moved her because they would need.
It's a possibility, or the people that had something to do with this, they were cohorts. Perhaps they weren't part of the field trip. They came to the park with a vehicle and parked likely in the Collins Gap parking area, because that's where the dogs picked up Trenny's scent. So if she was moved to that area, that would explain why her scent was there, and likely put in a car and taken either out of the park or deeper into the park.
Wow.
We haven't even talked about any of the other suspects.
No, we haven't talked.
This is why we had 5 episodes with you.
Well, yeah, there's a few, but that was always a little bit of a bane of contention with me, where her brother comes home Wednesday, Trenny disappears Friday. And that was one of the things that I had mentioned that I looked into more than once, and I'm still looking into this to this day. Was Trenny going missing somehow? Could it be possible it was a message to her brother? Was her brother involved in something? You know, I've got to look at this from every angle. I do know that it would make no sense if Trenny ran away, that she'd run away when her brother was down visiting, because she was crazy about him and she was so happy to see him, and they had some activities.
What kind of drugs did those I guess witnesses tell Jim? I mean, I guess I'm just curious, what kind of drugs are we talking about? I mean, Trenny was 16, right? I know her brother wasn't much older, only a few years older, I think. What kind of drugs were these?
Most of what the students were involved in those days was a little bit of pot, or it would usually be pills like speed, that kind of thing. Things that were relatively, inexpensive, that you could afford to buy, and that, got a little bit of a buzz off of. But pills were popular.
It's an interesting point you bring up about whether or not this was like a message to her brother. Was there? It feels to me like that would be an extremely intense message right away. Was there any other threats or anything that happened to him or his family beforehand? And
not that I can substantiate. And Bob was away. He was in the Navy, and he'd been gone since July. So he'd been away for about 3 months. And I've tried talking to people that knew Bob. None of them really thought that, there was any nefarious behavior. Certainly nothing any worse than any other students. Maybe smoked a little pot, that kind of thing. But no juvenile delinquency or anything like that. I reached out to a cousin of Trenny's, a first cousin that knew the family well. He remembers when Trenny vanished. She was a little bit older than he was. And he remembers Bob. And of course, Bob was older than he was. He just said that he didn't think that Bob was into anything necessarily bad. He just said that Bob sort of seemed to lack direction in his life. He didn't really know what he wanted to do once he finished high school, if he wanted to go to college, if he wanted to join the military, or if he wanted to get a job. He just seemed to sort of be drifting. But he did say that the family was happy. They were pleased when Bob joined the Navy, because they thought, then this might give Bob some direction in his life.
Very perplexing. How long did the search go on for Trenny on a daily basis before they started pulling back?
The search for Trenny went on until the first part of November 1976, and they found no evidence at all except some cigarette butts. There were some cigarette butts found close to the spot where Trenny went off the trail. There were some cigarette butts of the same brand found at the roadside in Collins Gap, where Trenny's scent was picked up by the tracking dogs. And when I talked to the first cousin, he said one of the comments made was the cigarette butts in Collins Gap, it almost looked like somebody had dumped their ashtray out, like taken their ashtray out of their car and dumped it out there. There must have been a significant pile. And there were more cigarette butts of this same brand that were found like through the woods, I guess, from one place to the other. So from where Trenny vanished to Collins Gap. But there were so many smokers in those days. I know that some of the students expressed regret too, because they said, well, we were smoking on the trail and we didn't think anything of it. We just put the cigarette out and, tossed the butt away or whatever. And then they felt bad. They thought maybe that they were, thinking they were the wrong cigarette butts or something, instead of the ones that were connected to Trenny's disappearance, when in all actuality, it was the cigarette butts that the students were smoking. And there was a half a can of beer. It was still fresh enough to smell. And that was found close to the spot where Trenny had stepped off the trail as well. But those were the only clues. And her
How
coat
crazy.
and her ring.
Now, Laura, I want to ask, and first of all, we're already past the hour mark here.
We've gone past the 10 o'clock hour.
We've cruised right past it very easily. Laura, I want to ask, you mentioned that there was some kind of documentary being produced on this case. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Well, through our series that we did on Trenny, I had a filmmaker reach out to me from the southern U.S., and he wanted to do a documentary film on Trenny's disappearance. So we've been conversing back and forth through telephone or email, and he's gotten his permit to film in the national park in the Smokies where Trenny disappeared. Right now, he's working on contacting students that went to school with Trenny, her family, teachers, rangers, and searchers that were part of the search for Trenny. He's talked quite a bit and interviewed and hiked with Dwight McCarter. Now, Dwight McCarter was one of the searchers on Trenny's that was involved with Trenny's search. And he's also authored several books, and he's been an avid hiker. He knows the Smokies very well. He's in his 70s, I believe, but he's been instrumental with helping this filmmaker basically do this documentary about Trenny. So filming is due to start in the spring, because the filmmaker has a couple of students that were working with him, and they're going for their master's degree. So they're doing their projects and so on and so forth right now. And then they plan to start filming in the spring. And they're working on interviewing, like I said, the people that were on the field trip, teachers, so-and-so, and on and on. I've been helping him track some of the people down if they want to talk. He did mention that there's going to be a little disclaimer at the end of the film that said that
good.
these people
Yeah, that's very good. Are you getting a like a producer credit on this for all the work that you're putting into it, or that you're going to be putting into it, all the research?
A credit. They're probably going to film some footage of me and work it into the documentary.
Great.
I would think I'm going to have some sort of part in it.
Yeah, that is exciting.
At least
oh
get
wow.
mentioned in the credits.
Yeah, definitely keep us updated on that as well.
Yeah, because you never know if the guilty party's out there and then they see a
I
documentary is
will.
happening. You know, you never know. Someone could crack because they just think that the heat's being turned on again.
Totally.
Yeah, and make sure they credit Crawlspace Media too. Make sure that we get a big fat executive producer credit.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Crawlspace will definitely get a credit. You and Lance, Tim, Jen, all of you will get a credit on there for bringing Trenny's story to light. Because really, that's about the only way I think this case will get solved. If somebody cracks, or somebody's ex-spouse or ex-best friend doesn't want to keep the secret anymore, or if something is found. I think that those are about our best chances.
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you. There are people thanking you in the message area here. Tara says, thanks for another informative show, the opportunity to hang out with good people.
Problem.
And she said, good job, Laura. You're amazing. Just excellent work on what you've done. And I just want everyone to know, listen to the episodes that we had with Laura, because it gets deeper and deeper. Like, we didn't even talk about another suspect. We didn't even talk about how Trenny, like, the house was broken into and Trenny was threatened. Like, we didn't even get into that.
Calvin Bowman. Well, Calvin Bowman, he's about the only person that I've ever run across that gets shot by a homeowner. The homeowner of the house that he's attempting to gain entry to, he's shot and then he gains entry. You'd think he'd want to book it the hell out of there, but no, he just crawls into
the 70s.
window and comes in the house. But hey,
yeah, he was probably smoking a cigarette too.
Lucky to be alive, but.
Probably.
I think there was something a little heavier involved.
Yeah, most likely.
But,
wow. Well,
yeah. But Calvin did have an axe to grind, and that was one of the reasons that he's a suspect. We just can't 100% say that he was necessarily at the park that day because he wasn't part of the field trip. If he found his own transportation and was still
right, and so this is just to not leave a complete cliffhanger here. Like, so this was a guy who tried to break into the Gibson house before Trenny went missing. Mrs. Gibson, Trenny's mom, actually shot him.
Right,
and as you said, he still made his way in, and then he was trying to get to Trenny.
Yeah. Yeah, it happened almost a year to the day that the year before the Trenny vanished. So it happened October 11th, 1975. And basically, this kid is out on the lawn and he was calling for Bob Gibson. Bob wasn't home. Hope Gibson was home alone with Trenny, her sister, and her youngest son. So she hears this calling, Bob, Bob, Bob. And she's watching this guy, and he goes over and he hunkers down by Trenny's bedroom window. So Hope, of course, is concerned. She grabs her pistol from underneath her pillow, and then she goes into the bathroom. And I believe she said she was standing in the bathtub watching out the bathroom window as this unfolded. And apparently, Calvin Bowman broke Trenny's window, and he was attempting to drag her outside. So when he stuck his foot out, Hope took aim and she shot him in the foot. So then, like I said, this is where it gets kind of weird. Now, Bowman is wounded in the foot, but he doesn't take off. He actually gains entry then and comes into the house through Trenny's broken bedroom window. Trenny went running down the hall, and her mother said she's just white as a sheet to get her mother. And Hope said that Bowman came out and he has his hands up or whatever. And Hope said then she kind of paused. She thought, okay, well, he's some mother's son or whatever. And she put the gun down. But they did call.
That's ridiculous. And you said that was almost a year to the day that she ended up going missing.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I've talked to Trenny's brother, and he said a little more. He said that this boy, which was Calvin Bowman, was hollering and screaming and telling Trenny, give me some pussy and all this and whatever. Her mother didn't mention any of that, and I wouldn't expect her to, but her brother told me all this. It was a real commotion. He said he was yelling and carrying on and whatever. But the Gibsons did have him charged, and he was sentenced to 2 years in a correctional facility, but he served less than 6 months, and he was out, and he was back at Bearden at the time that Trenny disappeared.
God. And so he pretty much a major suspect from the beginning, from the law enforcement perspective? Do you?
Not terribly, because he wasn't on the field trip, so they would have had to prove that he was in the park, and they really couldn't. And then what the icing on the cake was that the principal swore that Calvin was in school that day, and that was like getting a presidential pardon in those days, man. If the principal said you were in school all day, you were in school all day. But talking to other students, they said it was possible that Calvin came in, he went to homeroom, and he disappeared for the rest of the day. Attendance wasn't very strictly taken at Bearden unless you were in the college-bound courses. If you were in the college-level courses, attendance was very strictly taken, because basically you didn't show up. You weren't going to get grades.
Check out Canadian Girl 77. That's girl with a U. And that is Laura Riste's site, not Riste.
Riste.
Previously said on the podcast. I can't believe
numerous times
made such egregious errors. And definitely check out the article that Laura wrote for Private Investigations for the Missing website too, and we will link to that as well. And check out the episodes. Check out the episodes that we did on Missing Maura Murray. Thank you, Jillian, for the link. And we did 5 episodes, and Laura was in, I think, most of them, 4 of them, I think, about Trenny Gibson's disappearance. And Laura, we should have you back on the main feed to do an update.
Yeah, definitely talk about the documentary too.
For sure, and look for more articles to come on Private Investigations for the Missing, on other missing children.
Wow.
And
well, that's
teenagers.
excellent to hear.
I've got a couple
awesome.
of works
It's so reassuring to know that someone like yourself is looking into all of these cases, because again, like, you are probably one of the top, most thorough people that we've ever spoken to, who just independently looks into a disappearance. It's really impressive.
Well, Trenny really struck a chord with me. She's special. I wish I had the time to look into all the cases, but I'm going to be writing a couple of articles. They're in the works right now. They're both from my home country of Canada. One is from the province of Alberta, where I'm from, and one is from the province of Ontario that involves 2 missing boys that went missing together in 1981.
Yeah, we'll be looking for that. That's really good.
Yeah, we look forward to reading that. Thank you, Laura, and we'll connect offline about having you back on the main feed. This has been great catching up, and I appreciate your time, and thank you everyone in the chat room for joining us here on another lively Thursday night discussion.
It's been a true delight to spend my evening with you.
And if anyone out there has any questions for me about Trenny's story, you can reach out to me via my site. You can private message me on there. I don't have a moderator working for me. I am the moderator.
Fantastic. I don't know why I just pictured a T-shirt
questions regarding
with that you're gonna make that says "I am the moderator." It just feels right to me.
Very cool. Well, thank you.
I'm not sure I
No, but maybe the
anyone would want
T-shirt.
that gig.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks. This has been another great Thursday night, and make sure to check out Laura's site. And Lance, how those church bells doing?
The church bells have. I have just lost my accent. It's been exhausting. I'm exhausted. The church bells have chimed 10 times. They've sounded there. I can't.
Well, this
Go to bed.
go to bed. Yeah,
I'm not going to bed until Nevada figures out how to count.
Yeah, we'll be waiting for till the weekend. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. This has been another great conversation. We will be back next week, Thursday night, 9 p.m. Get vote.
Yep. Next week, and we have a very special guest next week who we're going to plan in the next 6 days. We'll figure out who it's going to be.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Laura. Good night.
Thank you for having me.